Okay, let's unpack this. If you've been anywhere near um, a news outlet, scrolling through social media, or maybe even just catching snippets of conversation lately, you've almost certainly had a particular phrase land, well, squarely in your awareness.
Hmm.
It's repeated with this intense, almost rhythmic frequency. 34 felonies
Yeah, you hear it everywhere.
everywhere. It's become more than just, a legal term. It feels like a political mantra, right? A singular point of focus, chanted in media segments, echoed at campaign rallies, woven into countless political discussions.
Absolutely.
The sheer volume, the relentless repetition. It's clearly designed to land with a very specific impact, to embed a definitive accusation deep into the public consciousness, shape perception, and ultimately aim to influence a critical moment.
And what's truly fascinating here, what makes this deep dive so compelling, is that we've received some source material that doesn't just, parrot this narrative.
Right.
Instead, it takes a deliberate step back to critically examine it. It offers a profoundly different lens to view these widely publicized charges through. Okay.
The core perspective presented in this document is particularly striking. For a significant and, well, vocal segment of the population, this relentless drumbeat about alleged felonies feels less like a genuine, impartial pursuit of justice
Mhm.
and more like a calculated, politically motivated attack aimed squarely at a specific individual.
So that's the core argument of the source material.
That's the perspective it lays out, yeah. And our mission in this deep dive is really to go far beyond the headline, to delve into the why behind this pervasive skepticism from, a substantial portion of the population.
Good.
We're going to systematically explore the specific arguments, the detailed observations, and the precise reasoning laid out in our source material that lead to this critical evaluation.
Okay.
And just to be absolutely clear up front, our goal here isn't to endorse or discredit any particular viewpoint. Not at all.
Right. Neutrality is key. Exactly. It is instead to meticulously dissect the arguments presented in the provided material, helping you, our listener, to understand the differing perspectives and the granular details underpinning them. It's about building comprehensive understanding, not swaying your conviction one way or the other.
Exactly. We're essentially pulling back the curtain on the mechanics of this narrative as presented by the source. So let's jump right into how this 34 felonies narrative is characterized within our source material.
Okay.
The document meticulously details what it describes as very specific democratic approach, one characterized by that singular, unwavering focus we just touched upon. It's a 34 felonies mantra, repeated endlessly, almost ritually, across a vast array of media outlets and woven into countless campaign speeches.
Constant repetition.
Constant. The implied intent, as explicitly presented in the source, is, well, disarmingly straightforward. To translate this constant, high-volume repetition directly into tangible electoral success.
The idea being, say it enough times.
Exactly. The underlying strategic thinking, according to the source, is that if you articulate this accusation enough times, if you brandish it as a definitive and undeniable truth, it will resonate deeply with voters, shift public opinion in a predetermined direction, and ultimately benefit one political side. It's described as a saturation strategy, basically, aimed at making the phrase synonymous with the person it targets, hoping the sheer volume overrides any deeper scrutiny.
And this isn't merely a casual observation or a superficial critique by the source. It immediately introduces a powerful counterargument. It suggests that while the strategic intent might be electoral success, this particular approach, this relentless focus on 34 felonies, may actually be, and this is a direct quote, fundamentally flawed in its execution.
Fundamentally flawed. Okay, why?
What? Well, the source highlights a very specific and influential demographic that views this tactic with profound and growing skepticism. It refers to many conservatives and reasonable individuals.
Interesting phrasing.
It is, and for these groups, the charges, as they are presented and repeated, simply do not register as a genuine, impartial legal pursuit. On the contrary, they are overwhelmingly perceived as a politically motivated attack, a weaponization of the legal system.
And that distinction is crucial for understanding the source's point.
Absolutely crucial, because it immediately challenges the assumed efficacy of the 34 felonies mantra. The source suggests that far from swaying undecided voters or broadening appeal, this tactic might instead be hardening existing political divisions.
So potentially counterproductive.
Potentially, yeah. solidifying opposition and inadvertently reinforcing a narrative of political persecution among those already predisposed to skepticism. It's a powerful claim, suggesting a significant, well, miscalculation in political strategy, according to this analysis.
That's where it gets really interesting because the source immediately raises a substantial flag about this approach,
Yeah.
suggesting it might not only be failing to achieve its intended effect, but could also be actively backfiring. And this isn't just an abstract feeling or a vague notion. The source lays out three incredibly compelling, interconnected pillars that, in its view, lend significant credence to the notion that Donald Trump is being unfairly targeted.
Okay, what are they?
These are the core arguments we're going to unpack in detail. First, there's the incredibly precise and, frankly, conspicuous timing of these charges.
That timing, got it.
Second, the source meticulously points to what it describes as their dubious legal foundations, questioning the very bedrock upon which these accusations stand.
Dubious legal foundations. Okay.
And third, it meticulously brings up questionable evidence used in the case, challenging the reliability and integrity of key prosecutorial elements.
Questionable evidence. Timing, legal foundations, evidence.
Exactly. Each of these components, according to the source, contributes profoundly and significantly to the widespread perception of political motivation, rather than a straightforward, dispassionate legal process. These three areas, timing, legal foundations, and evidence, truly form the analytical backbone of the skepticism that the document delves into.
Okay, so to truly grasp the essence of the source's argument regarding the perceived political nature of these charges, we absolutely must begin with a meticulous examination of the timeline presented.
The timing first.
The allegations against Trump, which form the entire basis for these 34 charges, purportedly stem from an alleged affair that, according to the source, took place all the way back in 2006.
2006. So, yeah, nearly 2 decades ago now.
Exactly. A significant passage of time in any legal context. Now, we must starkly contrast that with when any legal action actually materialized. It wasn't until 2017,
2017, okay.
a full decade after the alleged event, and crucially, after Donald Trump had not only announced his candidacy for president, but had successfully won the election and was already well into his term, that Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg decided to vigorously pursue this specific case.
Wow. So a 10-year gap between the alleged event and the DA deciding to pursue it specifically after he becomes president.
That is an extraordinarily significant chronological gap. And that's precisely the point the source hammers home.
And the source really, truly drills down on this decade-long gap, almost hammering the point home. It emphatically states, and it bears repeating, for over a decade, no prosecutor deemed these claims worthy of charges.
No prosecutor.
Think about that for a moment. 10 long years. During that span, multiple prosecutors held office in New York, right? And presumably these allegations were known, or at least knowable.
One would assume so, yes.
Yet, for all that time, these claims remain dormant, seemingly not substantial enough, not compelling enough, or perhaps not legally sound enough to warrant any form of legal action.
Right, just sitting there.
It genuinely makes you wonder, and this is precisely what the source intends to prompt in your mind, why they suddenly became actionable, became a priority at such a specific, politically charged moment in time. This isn't just a minor incidental detail in the source's analysis. It is, in fact, presented as a central, foundational point in its entire argument for perceived political motivation.
Yeah.
It begs a question.
What changed?
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this extensive dormancy of the allegations before a very specific political moment raises a profound question about prosecutorial discretion.
How so?
Well, and the typical considerations given to old cases. In the ordinary course of justice, prosecutors typically weigh a multitude of factors when considering whether to pursue charges related to events from so long ago.
Like what kind of factors?
Things like the inherent weakening of evidence over time.
Right.
Memories fade, witnesses might not be available.
Sure, that makes sense.
The potential for lost or corrupted documentation. Even the concept of latches, where an undue delay can actually prejudice a defense. It makes it harder for someone to defend themselves fairly.
Okay.
Now, while there aren't strict statutes of limitations for all crimes that would necessarily prevent such an old case, the practical challenges are immense.
Right.
The source's analysis implies that in this particular instance, the sheer significant delay, followed by what it pointedly calls swift action following Trump's announcement, stands out.
It stands out in an unusual way.
in such an unusual way that it suggests motives extending far beyond standard legal procedure or genuine public interest. That's the implication from the source.
So the argument is the timing is just too convenient.
The source presents it as suspiciously convenient, yeah. The sudden and seemingly opportunistic revival of such aged claims immediately after a major political development like a presidential announcement or election naturally invites intense scrutiny about the true impetus behind the charges. It forces a critical consideration of why dormant allegations suddenly become a top priority, prompting fundamental questions about the criteria and perhaps the impartiality used for prosecution.
So what does this all mean for you, someone trying to make sense of the constant barrage of news and political commentary? How does the source frame this?
Well, the source interprets this precise timing, this swift action following Trump's announcement, as an incredibly strong indicator, if not outright proof in their view, of political motivation behind the charges. It meticulously details how critics of the prosecution, as presented in the document, argue that such timing suggests a calculated attempt to undermine his campaign rather than a sincere interest in upholding justice.
So the focus shifts from the act itself to the timing of the prosecution.
Exactly. This perspective fundamentally shifts the focus away from the alleged affair itself and squarely onto the timing of the charges being brought. According to the source, this timing implies a strategic, deliberate move aimed squarely at political disruption.
And it encourages the listener to think about judicial independence.
Yes, it actively encourages you, the listener, to pause and consider the far-reaching implications of such a timeline on the public's perception of judicial independence.
Right. Because if old cases suddenly become priorities at politically opportune moments.
Exactly. If cases from over a decade ago, previously deemed unworthy of prosecution, suddenly emerge and become a high priority, what does that communicate about the impartiality of the legal system in the eyes of the public? Does it erode trust? Does it suggest a dangerous blurring of lines between law and politics? These are the kinds of vital questions the source prompts us to consider.
Okay, so that covers the timing aspect in detail. What about the second pillar? The dubious legal foundations.
Right. Moving now from the highly scrutinized timing to the very nature of the charges themselves, the source undertakes a truly deep dive into the legal foundations of these accusations, specifically focusing on the charge of falsification of records.
Falsification of records, okay.
And it is here that the document makes a particularly striking assertion about its unprecedented nature. It states with absolute clarity and directness that, historically speaking, no individual has been charged with this specific crime as a standalone felony in New York until now.
Wait, standalone felony, what does that mean exactly?
That's a great question. So, in New York, falsification of business records is typically considered a misdemeanor, a less serious offense.
Okay, a misdemeanor usually.
Right. It is generally elevated to a felony only if it is committed with the specific intent to conceal another crime.
Ah, okay, so the falsification itself isn't the felony, it's falsifying to hide something else that makes it a felony.
Precisely. And the source meticulously highlights that elevating this particular charge to a felony in this manner, seemingly without clear or direct prior precedent as a standalone basis, immediately flags it as an extraordinary and highly unusual legal maneuver.
So the source is saying this application of the law is novel.
It suggests an innovative, perhaps even a stretching, of existing legal frameworks to fit a unique prosecutorial objective. That's the argument presented.
Okay, let's really unpack this for a moment, because the source truly zeroes in on this specific detail, and it is, frankly, a crucial and complex point. Beyond the standalone felony aspect, the prosecution, as described in the source, made what it characterizes as a last-minute revelation.
A last-minute revelation.
Yeah, that these allegedly falsified records were intended to conceal an uncharged federal campaign finance violation.
Uncharged. Okay, that seems important.
Very. So it's not simply about the act of falsifying records in isolation. It's about what they were supposedly covering up, and that alleged cover-up points to a federal crime.
Right. The other crime needed to make it a felony.
Exactly. But here's the absolutely critical question that the source boldly raises, a question that lingers pointedly in the air. If there was indeed an underlying violation worth pursuing federally, why was Trump not charged by federal authorities?
Good question. Why wasn't he?
Well, the source doesn't answer it directly, but it implies. This isn't a rhetorical question in the source's view. It actively prompts you to consider why federal agencies, the DOJ, the FEC, armed with their expensive jurisdiction, vast resources, and specialized expertise in campaign finance law, did not themselves pursue these alleged violations if they were indeed so clear, so significant, and so provable.
So the lack of federal charges casts doubt on the state-level felony elevation.
That's exactly the implication presented. The silence from the federal level, according to the source, speaks volumes about the perceived strength, or perhaps lack thereof, of that underlying other crime.
This specific point raises an incredibly important question about legal consistency, doesn't it? And how novel interpretations of existing statutes might emerge, or, as the source more critically suggests, how existing legal frameworks might be intentionally stretched to fit a specific outcome.
Stretched like legal gymnastics.
Exactly. The source interprets the significant discrepancy, the notable absence of federal charges for the underlying alleged violation, combined with what it describes as the shifting and evolving legal basis for the state charges, as suggesting that prosecutors may be engaging legal gymnastics without precedent or strong justification.
That phrase, legal gymnastics, is pretty vivid.
It is, isn't it? It implies a perception of bending, twisting, or stretching legal interpretations or procedures in novel ways, essentially building a legal bridge where one didn't explicitly exist before, all potentially to ensure a particular outcome.
Like forcing a square peg into a round hole.
That's a good analogy. Using increasingly complex and unconventional maneuvers. This is a powerful accusation because it directly challenges the integrity of the legal process itself. It implies that the law is being manipulated for a specific, non-legal end, perhaps a political one.
And this contributes to the skepticism.
Absolutely. The source suggests that this perceived contortion of legal norms, especially when lacking clear historical precedent, naturally contributes to the widespread public skepticism about the true legitimacy and fairness of these particular charges. It raises a deeper concern about the potential for politicization within the justice system and how such actions could set dangerous precedents for future prosecutions.
Okay, so we've covered timing and legal foundations. That brings us to the third pillar, the evidence and witness testimony.
Right, another critical area that the source meticulously scrutinizes. We now delve deeply into how evidence and, crucially, witness testimony were handled in this high-profile case.
What does the source highlight here?
Well, the document describes a specific, significant action undertaken by the defense. Trump's legal team had prepared a highly relevant expert witness.
An expert witness on what?
This wasn't just any witness. This expert was specifically intended to testify that the alleged campaign finance violation was not even a violation under federal law.
Wow. So directly challenging that other crime needed for the felony charge.
Exactly. That is an absolutely pivotal point because, as we discussed, if the underlying federal violation isn't even legally considered a violation, it fundamentally and significantly weakens the prosecution's entire case for elevating the falsification of records from a misdemeanor to a felony.
Yeah, it pulls the rug out from under their primary justification.
Completely. Crucially, the source explicitly states the outcome of this defense strategy. Yet this crucial testimony was barred from court proceedings by the judge overseeing the trial.
Barred. The judge wouldn't allow the expert to testify.
That's what the source states. This means the defense was explicitly prevented from presenting a key argument delivered by an expert that directly challenged a core foundational premise of the prosecution's entire case.
The source must frame that as a major issue.
It positions this as a major red flag, absolutely. Questioning the fairness of the trial proceedings when such critical defense testimony is excluded.
What's truly fascinating and deeply concerning here, as the source highlights, is how this exclusion is framed as a pivotal point for establishing innocence. And its barring raises profoundly significant questions about the scope and impartiality of evidence allowed in the trial.
Can you elaborate on that? Why is barring an expert so significant?
Well, in any legal context, expert testimony is often absolutely crucial for clarifying complex technical or legal issues, particularly when they involve interpretations of intricate laws or specialized standards like federal campaign finance regulations.
Right, because the average juror wouldn't necessarily understand all the nuances.
Precisely. The implications of a court barring expert testimony that directly challenges a core, foundational premise of the prosecution's argument are substantial and far-reaching. It can lead to a very strong perception, especially among outside observers, that the defense was not afforded a full and fair opportunity to present its case.
So it impacts the perception of fairness, even if there were technical legal reasons for the ruling.
Exactly. This kind of procedural decision, particularly when it stifles a direct challenge to the prosecution's foundational claims, can profoundly affect the perceived fairness and integrity of the trial in the eyes of the public. And, as the source unequivocally suggests, it further fuels suspicions among many regarding the ultimate legitimacy and impartiality of the entire legal proceedings. It highlights how procedural decisions can, sometimes ironically, contribute to a broader narrative of bias, even if unintended.
Okay, so the defense expert was barred. Now, let's sharply contrast that with whom the prosecution chose to rely upon as its primary witness, as described by the source, Michael Cohen.
Michael Cohen, yes.
The source minces no words in its characterization, using very specific and potent language. It describes Cohen as a convicted liar and self-admitted thief.
That's quite a description.
It is, and it isn't just an offhand, casual remark or throwaway line. It's a very deliberate and specific descriptor used to immediately frame, for the reader, the profound credibility issues of a key witness in such a high-stakes case.
And the source says the prosecution relied heavily on him.
Yes, the document then explicitly explains that the prosecution relied heavily on him, implying that his testimony was not merely supplementary but central to their case.
Okay, so putting those two pieces together, the defense expert is barred, while the prosecution's star witness is described as having major credibility issues. What does the source conclude from that?
Well, it suggests, quite starkly, a fundamental imbalance in the presentation of evidence, and an underlying vulnerability in the prosecution's reliance on a witness whose honesty has been, by his own admission and by legal conviction, severely compromised.
This reliance on what the source pointedly refers to as dubious testimony, especially when considered in conjunction with the controversial barring of a defense expert witness, undeniably raises significant and deeply unsettling ethical concerns about the overall integrity of the prosecution's case, according to the source anyway.
It layers concern upon concern.
Exactly. Furthermore, it explicitly underscores and amplifies the existing suspicions regarding its legitimacy, as outlined in the source. The source essentially posits that when a legal case of such national significance hinges so heavily on a witness with a documented and self-admitted history of dishonesty, a witness whose credibility has been publicly challenged and legally compromised.
Right.
And concurrently, when counter-testimony that could directly undermine the very premise of the charges is disallowed, it collectively creates a powerful and deeply troubling narrative of a compromised legal process.
So it damages public trust.
That's the argument. This kind of situation can have a profoundly corrosive impact on the public's fundamental trust in the legal system, particularly among those who are already inclined to view these specific charges through a lens of political motivation. It overtly challenges the fundamental idea of justice being blind and impartial,
Suggesting that external factors might be influencing outcomes.
It suggests that in this instance, external factors or strategic decisions might have influenced the procedural outcomes in a way that prioritizes conviction over an unblemished pursuit of truth. That's the perspective presented. It suggests that, in the eyes of many, the scales of justice may appear to be tipped.
Okay, so after meticulously dissecting the timing, the legal foundations, and the handling of evidence and witnesses, what's the source's conclusion about the effectiveness of the whole 34 felonies tactic? Does it think it worked?
That's a key question. The source arrives at a compelling and rather stark conclusion regarding the actual effectiveness of the tactic itself. It reiterates, with no ambiguity, that while Democrats may believe that repeatedly shouting 34 felonies will sway public opinion in their favor leading up to elections, this tactic appears increasingly ineffective among conservatives and rational voters alike.
Increasingly ineffective, so direct challenge to the strategy.
A direct, emphatic challenge to the presumed success of that relentless repetition strategy. The force is essentially saying, it's not working in the way intended, at least not with these specific groups.
And why? Why does the source say it's ineffective with them?
Well, the reason why it's ineffective, as the document elaborates, is precisely because these groups, conservatives and rational voters alike, are demonstrably able to recognize the potential for political manipulation behind these charges against Trump.
So they see through it, essentially.
That's the claim. They are not simply passively absorbing the mantra. Instead, they are actively and critically assessing the broader context, the origins, and the underlying motivations driving these charges. And that critical assessment, according to the source, leads them to view the charges with deep skepticism rather than accepting them at face value as definitive proof of wrongdoing. It highlights a fundamental disconnect between the intended message and its actual reception by these segments of the population.
And if we connect this to the broader picture, this isn't just a commentary on this specific legal case, is it? It seems to speak to a much wider principle.
Absolutely. It speaks to a profoundly important principle of information consumption in our current hyperpolarized information climate.
Right. The source's final recommendation isn't just a suggestion for political strategists or media pundits. It's framed as a direct and urgent imperative for you, the citizen, for all of us.
Okay.
It remains imperative for citizens to critically evaluate such narratives rather than accept them at face value. This statement profoundly underscores the immense and indispensable value of independent thought. And a healthy dose of skepticism in navigating the increasingly complex and often overwhelming landscape of public narratives, especially in an age defined by information overload and highly polarized media.
So it's a call for active engagement, not passive acceptance.
Exactly. It's a powerful call to action, to move beyond the superficial headline, to question the timing of major developments, to scrutinize the legal basis of accusations, and to critically examine the handling of evidence in any significant public case.
And the source links this directly back to the Trump trials.
Yes, the source specifically connects this timeless principle of critical evaluation directly to the current events unfolding around Trump's trials and tribulations, suggesting that these particular circumstances, with all their layers of complexity and controversy, serve as a particularly potent and timely case study for why critical evaluation is more important now than perhaps ever before.
Okay, let's unpack this a little further, because it truly is a direct call to action for you, the listener. To engage with information actively, thoughtfully, and critically, rather than simply passively receiving it.
Right. Don't just take the headline.
Exactly. In a world saturated with information, where phrases like 34 felonies are repeated endlessly in an attempt to shape perception, the source is essentially saying, pause. Take a moment. Look beyond the repetition, beyond the headline.
That's the hard questions.
Ask probing questions about the origins of the information, the potential motivations behind its dissemination, and the specific details that underpin the claims. It's about empowering yourself to form your own informed conclusions, not simply accepting a widely propagated narrative.
And this applies beyond just this case, obviously.
Absolutely. This principle extends far beyond the specific legal case, encouraging a healthier, more discerning approach to all news consumption, regardless of the topic. It's about developing a robust filter for what you consume, ensuring that your understanding is built on a foundation of critical thought, not just passive absorption.
So we've taken an extensive deep dive today into a very specific, critical perspective on the 34 felonies narrative that continues to swirl around former President Trump. We systematically explored source material that offers a meticulous, critical examination of this widely repeated phrase, moving far beyond its surface-level presentation.
Yeah, we started by analyzing how the Democratic strategy, as described by the source, appears to rely heavily on the constant, almost ritualistic repetition of 34 felonies, with the explicit aim of translating that repetition into electoral success.
Right, but we swiftly moved into the source's core counter-argument. That this very strategy is perceived by a significant and growing number of conservatives and rational individuals as fundamentally flawed.
Right. For them, it doesn't appear as a genuine legal pursuit, but rather as a politically motivated attack.
And that perception, according to the source, is largely fueled by those three pillars we discussed, the extraordinary timing of the charges.
The decade-long gap.
Their purportedly dubious legal foundations.
The standalone felony issue and the federal angle.
And the handling of what the source describes as questionable evidence.
A barred expert and the reliance on Cohen.
Yeah, indeed. We broke down these arguments into their constituent parts with careful detail. First, we delved into the extraordinary timing, how allegations from 2006 only materialized into charges in 2017, long after Trump's presidential run had commenced.
Yeah, the source emphasizing that for over a decade, no prosecutor deemed these claims worthy of action, suggesting this revival was a calculated political move rather than a standard legal progression.
Then we meticulously dissected the legal foundations, focusing on the charge of falsification of records as a standalone felony, which the source explicitly states is unprecedented in New York.
Right, and we examined the prosecution's last-minute revelation about an uncharged federal campaign finance violation and the source's pointed question about the striking absence of federal charges for this alleged underlying crime.
Which, the source argues, points to what it vividly terms legal gymnastics, implying a stretching of legal interpretations without strong justification or clear precedent.
And finally, we delved into the highly scrutinized handling of evidence and witness testimony, which the source casts as deeply problematic.
Hmm. The document highlights the concerning fact that a crucial defense expert witness, who was prepared to argue that the alleged campaign finance violation wasn't even a violation under federal law, was barred from testifying in court.
Which, according to the source, significantly hampered the defense's ability to challenge a core premise of the prosecution's case.
And in stark contrast, the prosecution heavily relied on Michael Cohen, whom the source unequivocally describes as a convicted liar and self-admitted thief.
Right. These accumulated points, the exclusion of critical defense testimony and the heavy reliance on a witness with such a documented history of dishonesty, according to the source, collectively raise significant ethical concerns about the overall integrity of the prosecution's case.
Moreover, they further underscore and amplify existing suspicions among many regarding its ultimate legitimacy, contributing powerfully to the narrative that this entire endeavor is driven more by political motivations than by a pure, impartial pursuit of justice.
So our deep dive today has provided you, our listener, with a meticulously detailed look into why certain significant segments of the population view these charges with such profound skepticism rather than simply reiterating the charges themselves.
It's about understanding the arguments behind the skepticism.
Exactly. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what does all of this mean for how you approach the news and information you encounter going forward?
Yeah, what's the takeaway for the listener?
Consider, for a moment, how often the timing and the framing of legal or political narratives might powerfully influence their public perception, sometimes regardless of the underlying facts themselves.
Presentation matters.
It really does. Think about the subtle ways in which the when and how something is presented can shape its reception, creating a powerful narrative that can be hard to dislodge. What other major headlines that dominate our news cycles right now might benefit from this very same kind of deep, critical evaluation?
Looking beyond the surface.
Exactly. Where you look not just at what's being said, but when it's being said, how it's being presented, and perhaps most importantly, by whom it's being presented.
Good questions to ask.
So the next time you encounter a widely repeated phrase or a definitive accusation in the news, I challenge you to pause, take a breath, and then ask yourself, what are the deeper arguments and counter-arguments being made, and what are the specific granular details that truly underpin them? It's about empowering yourself to become a more discerning consumer of information in an increasingly complex world.